how you communicate, how you create senses of urgency, how
Hmm.
you create trust, how you position yourself as a credible resource, how
Hmm.
you follow up, how you ask questions, how
Hmm.
you get someone to open up. That's all science,
Hmm.
right? There's a whole science on getting people to open up, right? It's
Yeah.
called psychology and psychiatry. There's two of them.
Welcome to the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. If you are listening to this, you are likely leading a team responsible for generating revenue. Purpose of Full Funnel Freedom is to support people like yourself and keep your funnels consistently, reliably full. Welcome to the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Hamish Knox. Today, I am delighted to have Will Fuentes from Maestro Group as my guest. Will is the founder of Maestro Group, which is a sales acceleration firm that focuses on teaching sales professionals the science of sales. Will has worked with companies from the earliest stages of inception to exit. In his spare time, he loves to spend time with his family, coach, and watch sports. Will, welcome to Full Funnel Freedom.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I had a blast on our prep call, and clearly we nerd out about very similar things as it relates to sales. So excited to share that with our audience of sales leaders today. Before we get to that, I've given the audience the 30,000 foot view of who you are and what you do. Take us down. Tell us Will's story, how you got to where you are today, and who are
Sure.
you working with right now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, my story starts off in law school. I graduated law school early and realized very quickly that I was not a very good attorney. And so, struggling to figure out what to do with my life, I ended up working at a retailer, a big electronics retailer here in the US,
Hmm.
where I quickly figured out that I was pretty good at sales. I took some of the methods that I was using and I created a tracker. That tracker caught the attention of some executives. They then, gave me an opportunity to join the organization where I really learned from them managing salespeople, just managing people in general, customers, and all manners of sales and everything else. After a few years in retail, decided that I wanted to, kind of shift a career. I love retail, but the weekend hours and the holiday hours and all that stuff
Hmm.
makes it really difficult on a family. So decided to create a software startup.
Okay.
Created a software startup focused on retail. That was a little bit ahead of its time. Overall, it was a great experience, but we were a little bit early.
Hmm.
But from that, I garnered a reputation in the tech community around someone who understood sales and how to actually get into big accounts and all this other
Hmm.
stuff. So I started consulting on the side as a little side hustle, train salespeople from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then go to my job.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was kind of a fun little experience, right? Doing that. Ended up having a client offer me a job and realized pretty quickly that I wasn't really meant to work for someone else in that capacity as a sales leader. And about a month into it, we decided to part ways. I called my wife and said, "Hey, I'm gonna just focus on teaching people sales because I loved my 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and that was the best part of my job. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna build a company." Went out and hired some industrial organizational behavioral psychologists to follow me around and help memorialize what I was doing
Hmm.
if what I was doing was not unique to me. That was the key thing is like, if what I'm doing is unique to me, I don't want to memorialize that because I don't want to train and teach people how to be me. I want
Right.
to teach them around the science of human decision making and how organizations function almost as an organism. And if we can
Hmm.
understand those two components, we can teach people a repeatable process. And so we did that. And, that was 8 years ago. And since then, Maestro has helped 170 companies. We've helped 35 of them, get to their dream of exiting, which
Hmm.
is pretty amazing. And
Hmm.
today we are working with companies, as small as under $1 million in ARR to about 750 million, which is really exciting across all sorts of types of projects, from creating onboarding programs to teaching and training their staff to
Hmm.
functioning as interim CROs. So
Wow.
really get to touch all aspects of sales today, and work with some pretty awesome companies that are doing some of them are doing world changing things.
Hmm.
Others of them are just fighting the good fight.
Love it. Love it. Very cool. So, Will, there are sales leaders listening to this who have sellers on their team who are like, come on, man, science, like it's an art,
Yeah,
right? I go and I talk to
yeah,
people. I make money for me and for my business. So let's unpack this idea of science, because you and I are aligned on this. I think sales is a science. However, there is still that attitude that it is an art. So from your perspective, walk us through this whole science side and why you feel it's really important.
Yeah. So for me, right, what you're dealing with is humans and human decision making, right? That
Mm-hmm.
human decision making happens in the brain, and that happens when there's trust and credibility.
Mm-hmm.
Gets to a point where if someone feels comfortable. All
Mm-hmm.
of these things are influenced by the things that we do, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
if we do them in a consistent manner, which is what science is like a repeatable process,
Right.
right? Then we can influence decision making. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that yeses are a science. I'm saying that decision making is a science.
Totally.
Right. And so like, yeah, a little bit of the yes comes from the art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the yes comes from the art. But to me, how you communicate, how you create senses of urgency, how
Mm-hmm.
you create trust, how you position yourself as a credible resource,
Mm-hmm.
how you follow up, how you ask questions, how
Mm-hmm.
you get someone to open up. That's all science,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a whole science on getting people to open up, right? It's
Yeah,
called psychology and psychiatry. There's two of them, right? Like,
totally.
and this is, this is really what we're doing. And I think even the following up, right? A lot of people, I often tell them, like, if you are following up in a consistent manner and you do this, like, and you're not getting the results, the beauty
Mm-hmm.
is you're doing it in a consistent manner, like a science experiment. You
Totally.
can change a variable
Mm-hmm.
and see how that variable changes the outcomes. And that to me is what makes sales a science, is that
Yeah.
like there's all these variables, but if you can create controlled experiments, you
Mm-hmm.
can get maximum outcomes.
Absolutely love it. Yeah. When we're working with our clients, it's consistency, predictability, replicability, and then that ultimately creates scale. Let's talk science experiments, because again, something you and I are very much aligned on is this idea of experiments. For the leaders who are listening, the sales leaders, what does an experiment look like that they could run that is not going to cost them their job? Because when I've talked to leaders about this, they're like, well, I can't do that because I'm going to get fired. Like, no. Well, yes, if you do the wrong one. From your perspective, how do we run safe experiments that can actually help us accelerate our sales results and our sellers?
There's two things we have to think about: an experiment that's safe and is an experiment that's going to deliver value.
Mm-hmm.
Right, just running an experiment for the sake of running an experiment. Can I tweak this? Can I tweak that? And then a lot of people will do that. I'm like, what's the outcome you're expecting? Like, if this works, like, how does this help the business? Right. So
Exactly.
I'll give you a great one of the experience that we ran that we found that was incredibly helpful. We are not priced as the most expensive solution in the market, but we're also
Mm-hmm.
not the least expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I have all my sellers. I started with an experiment very long. Could I shrink the sales cycle and discount less by framing in our intro that we're expensive?
Okay.
So we ran an experiment where we would talk to people and say, hey, we really focus on the science of sales, et cetera. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things about us though is we are expensive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what we found was, right, we wanted to see what the reaction was. And so people would say, how expensive? I said, oh, for a team of your size, it'll cost X. And people
Mm-hmm.
would respond back like, oh, that's not expensive. So we knew we knew that the frame up, right, because of the way that we delivered the presentation, the way that we spoke, and all like
Mm-hmm.
very similar to how you're in a shirt and a tie, right? It all seemed like this really high end, highbrow product that we were
Mm-hmm.
delivering. I'm bringing on like published authors that are part of our program that help your
Mm-hmm.
team how to write, and so you're thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm bringing on, at the time I would bring on like former, executives from Fortune 500s that were part of like some of the consulting and strategy side.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like this is going to be outrageous. And then you frame that up to anchor them to whatever in their mind seems expensive from what you've seen. And
Mm-hmm.
then immediately, so what we knew was, okay, like that's the response for us. And we know that now, like we've now anchored them to a price, we can move that. And so that's become part
Mm-hmm.
of our sales process is we do it because there's two things that I want to uncover. Number one is, if even though I know we're not at the high end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if that's still too expensive, this may not be the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And number two is I'm not going to fight a battle on price when they tell me it's not that expensive. So that's going to accelerate my sales cycle.
Amen.
So that's a very simple experiment, like in terms of like how you position yourself, how you
Mm-hmm.
position yourself in the market. Another great experiment that I love is this is how we do business.
Mm-hmm.
Experiment, which is walking someone through how internally you defined your sales process
Mm-hmm.
and literally showing that to someone and seeing like what the reaction is and how much they adhere to it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people like to be guided, but the biggest thing for me in that experiment is, am I creating a sense of trust between the buyer, the
Mm-hmm.
seller, and the seller's organization? Like, hey, there's some trust here. And that's a very simple one that you can run in the hopes of
Mm-hmm.
getting process adherence and faster sales cycle.
Sales leaders, AI is here, and it means that sales is evolving. Is your sales team? Download our new guide on AI and sales, and you will learn how to support your sellers in leveraging AI to gain a competitive advantage, communicate more effectively with their buyers, and ultimately sell more with less effort. Go to fullfunnelfreedom/AI to get your copy today. That's fullfunnelfreedom.com/AI. Prospects will agree and suspects will fight, right? Someone who is
Yeah,
not a qualified buyer be like, come on, man, like just give me a quote, or why do I have to jump through all these hoops? And the prospect's
that's right.
like, okay, I have an outcome. I'm at A, I want to get to B. Will has just told me how to get from A to B. Let's do this. Now, it doesn't
That's
mean
right.
that all of a sudden their credit card pops up and magically we close the sale, because they have things they need to check. But I love that idea of share your process. Like, absolutely, right up front. Let's share that process. I am curious. Let's circle back. You had a couple of
Yeah.
scientists follow you around. What
Yeah.
did they come back with? Like, obviously you built a business out of it, so it wasn't just unique to Will. What was the feedback that they gave you after they followed you around for however long it was?
Yeah, so a couple of things. They said I innately knew how to make people comfortable by using their language when
Okay.
speaking to them.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've always done is, if you use an adjective or an adverb, I like write that and then I use that in within a couple of sentences, so that
Mhm.
like you and I start to connect. Like, it's just, I didn't know why I was doing it. I didn't know, like, obviously internally I liked the response that I would get from both, in my personal and professional life. Right?
Mhm.
Like, I like
Yeah,
the
totally.
response that I would get from that. So that was one, using the language that people. So
Mm.
that's a listening thing, right? The other thing that they said was that I was very good at getting the fear of the unknown out of the way and
Mm.
creating a sense of familiarity as well. So the two things that they thought, and we talk about these as non-negotiables,
Mhm.
was number one is every call that they saw me on, I always had an agenda. And so for them, it was like, okay, like the unknown of whether this is going to be a waste of time or not, I was washing that away pretty
Okay.
quickly. What was about to happen, I was washing that away
Mhm.
pretty quickly as well. And the fact that I did that every single time created a sense of familiarity, so
Mhm.
that all of a sudden you're creating trust. You trust the familiar.
Mhm.
Even if the familiar is something you don't like, you actually will
Mm.
trust, right? It's like, hey, I would rather know that that person is going to punch me in the face every time so I can avoid them,
Right.
right? It's like, I trust what's going to happen. And so, like, those were some of the things that you know, that they felt was really strong that I did, that created,
Mm.
this repeatable process. The other thing that they thought was pretty interesting, and we teach this all the time, was I adhered to my timeline on the
Mm.
call, right? And so I don't know where I picked it up, but I say something like this. I say, hey, we're scheduled for the next 25 minutes. Does that still work for you?
Mhm.
And so we call it the time check now. We teach the time check, right?
Sure.
And they thought it was just like, if I said 25 minutes, I was done at 25. If I said
Mhm.
40, I was done at 40.
Totally.
Right. And so that's a sense of trust again. I'm doing what I say I'm going to do.
Mhm.
Um, and that actually led me to add some other things that they suggested, which was, suggesting in my emails what I'm going to do
Mm.
if I don't hear from someone, and then actually doing
Mhm.
it. We teach people that.
Totally.
Again, sense of
Mhm.
trust again. So those are some of the big ones that like really, start off. The other thing that they said was, because I think it was because of my law background, going to law school,
Mm.
I was very Socratic in my questioning, which allowed people to get to the answers that they owned. They own their own answer, right? So it's not me putting
Totally.
words in their mouth. It's not
Yep.
me driving like someone down. It's like, it's like, in law, when you cross-examine someone, you ask binary questions, right? Because you want to
Mhm.
control the narrative, and
Right.
you're going to own that narrative.
Mhm.
But when you're direct examining someone, you are not allowed to lead the witness, right? They say you cannot lead the witness, right? And so
Exactly.
you have to let them tell their own narrative. And so,
Mhm.
a lot of salespeople say, "Oh, we got to lead them down the path." No, 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 no. You want
No.
to give them the path opportunities, and you want them to pick those paths themselves to own the journey.
Yeah.
And they just said I did that very well.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. The time thing, right? Everyone is scared that someone is going to waste their time. Now, especially with sellers, right? Because we've all had the experience of the sellers like, oh, this will take 30 minutes. And then 90 minutes later, it's like, when is this nightmare going to end? Or even the like, knock, knock, hey, boss, got a minute? Well, we all know it's never a minute, right? And we're already in the middle of something. I love the or less, right? Hey, Will, this will be 25 minutes or less, because then
Oh, I love it.
even if it is the single worst experience of your day or your week, you're like, at least it's over in 25 minutes because
Yeah.
he told me it's or less 25 minutes. And then that way, especially our clients who are in customer service roles, right, where they're handling difficult conversations, and the person just wants the outcome, like you said, right? They just want the outcome. That or less really just goes, and then they can actually have that real conversation that you were chatting about. So again, you and I are aligned on this whole science idea. I gotta believe, given all the success you've had with your clients, the leaders are bought into this idea. What's the resistance that our listeners should be aware of from the frontline individual contributor sellers to this kind of approach? Because I've run into it. I'm sure you have. What are some of the yellow and red flags that our listeners should be watching out for when it comes to implementing a science-based process for selling?
Yeah. So I think number one is that sellers think that like they know what they're doing hands down and they don't need to be taught. Like you're going to have a couple of those cowboys
Oh
that
yeah.
exist and cowgirls that exist in the world. Right. So that's
Yeah.
number one, is just like, and I get it, by the way, because like, it's like, wait, especially if they're successful, it's like,
Yeah.
hey, you're asking me to change the way that I do things, but yet half of my pay is determined by the outcomes.
Right.
And I've been successful, right? So
Exactly.
that's gonna be one of the tough ones. So one of the first things for me was we spent a lot of time getting the academic research in the science of what we teach, right? And so like arming yourself with like real data when you're teaching
Mm.
someone this is important, right? Like not just saying, oh, humans trust more when you no. Like listen, like if you want to learn more,
Yeah.
hey, go to this and go read here, or here's the book where the study was done, right? Like I
Yeah.
think that's a big deal for adult learners. Number one is like, can I
Mm.
trust the source, right? Whether
Totally.
you got it from. The second resistance is that it's hard.
Mm.
It's like it's hard at first. It's hard to follow a
Mm-hmm.
process. I mean, it's like anything, right? Like if you're going on a diet, like those first couple of weeks are hard, right? It's like,
Yeah.
man, I really want to eat that piece of chocolate, right? Because you just haven't built the muscle, you just haven't built
Mm-hmm.
the stamina to push through those cravings, like those cravings or whatever it is. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
very, very hard. And so part of the resistance even comes from the sales leaders.
Yeah.
Can I continue to hold my team accountable to what we're going to be doing? Can I not let things slide, right? Can I
Totally.
say, okay, every single meeting is going to have an agenda? And am I going to be okay saying to someone, hey, the meeting outcome was good, but like you didn't have an agenda? And we
Exactly.
do that every time,
Yep.
right? Like, and so like I think there's some resistance there. And I think the final piece is like, you know, is like it's always been an art. It's always been an art. Why are you telling me it's science? There's no way
Mm.
this could be science.
Totally.
And I think that's just someone just trying to be obstinate and difficult,
Yeah.
because when you really get down to the crux of it, is like I always say, hey, it's humans communicating,
Yeah.
and like and communication happens in the brain, and like
Yeah.
if you're telling me that like we can't understand the brain through science,
Mm-hmm.
then and only understand the brain through art, then like we must be living on different planets.
Amen. Amen to that. Yeah, I the whole idea about like backing things up, because I imagine you've had this experience of the sales team who has a leader who saw some guy at a conference or gal at a conference and is like, oh, we're going to bring them in. And it's like 7 people later, it's like, and I met Will. And like, okay, we're tired of this, boss. Like, can you stop beating us over the head? Like, what is this person going to be saying that's different from all the other people just in different clothing, right? So that idea of like having the data to back it up, having the research to back it up is absolutely brilliant. Will, clearly we can nerd out about this stuff all day long.
Yeah.
And, both of us are running businesses, so it's not going to happen. And our audience has stuff to do as well. So I got a few more questions for you before we wrap up. Question number one, you have had a very successful career. You've also got a lot of scar tissue and some bumps and bruises. If you could go back and coach younger Will, go back as far as you like, what would you coach younger Will to say or do different to get to the same place with a little less scar tissue and fewer bumps and bruises?
Stop being so arrogant.
Oh, say more about that.
Yeah. So no one could teach me anything when I was younger. I knew it all.
Got it.
I was going to do it my way. I wasn't going to listen to those that had come before and had the scar tissue that I have today.
Yeah.
And I was going to believe that, because I naturally had some good instincts and I found success, right? I mean, it was one of these things where, I was competing in an arena that has no barrier to entry. And so I was successful. I'm a decently smart individual. So I found success, and I have a personality that is garrulous and can create energy and stuff. So in sales, you're going to be able to create some success with those two things.
Totally.
And had I just listened to the people that were like, hey man, if you could just figure out how to do the things consistently and just be good, and the things that you're not good at, learn how to get better at, right? Learn how to be more consistent in your follow-up, and learn how, if I just listened to that, I would have hit this point way earlier in my career. But the arrogance will stifle any success in life. I absolutely it's one of those things that if you're not willing to learn, it's going to be very difficult for you to be as successful as you possibly can be.
Amen. Great advice. Love that.
You looked shocked when I said that, huh? Have you ever heard that one before?
I haven't actually, and so that's a lot of humility on your part. So thank you for your humility and your vulnerability to share that with me and with our audience of sales leaders. That and really powerful statement. And I gotta believe that we'll get a bunch of comments on social media about hey, dude, me too, right? Get it. I was that seller. I was that person rolling their eyes in the back of the training session, or when my boss is like, hey, I have a couple of ideas for you. They're like, yeah, whatever, you can't teach me anything. So thank you for that humility and vulnerability to share that with our audience today. Curious, what have you read, watched, listened to, whether it was years ago or recently, that you would recommend the audience check out?
There's a good book called The Science of Sales. You can read that book. That's an excellent book. I'm sure a lot of your audience has it. I love to follow. These are non-sales people, by the way. Rob Henderson has a fantastic blog that's out there. Talks about just humans in general and human psychology, decision-making, tribalism, all the things that influence sales, politics. Yeah. Right. The fear of losing, the fear of winning, all the things that go into selling and understanding. Yeah. Ed Lattimore talks about the physics of life. I believe sales is physics, right? So an object in motion, a deal in motion stays in motion, a deal at rest dies, right? So he talks a lot about physics. So those are going to be some of the spots where I'm spending a lot of my time, honestly, today, is understanding deeper human psychology and also understanding from a scientific perspective how momentum and physics and other things affect the way that we live our lives. I'm really passionate about studying great performers, whether it's in the athletic arena, political arena, or even in the arts, and their level of preparation. So I just read recently, this is, for the audience, right? We talk about preparing, and we talk about no matter how good you get, just preparing and honing your craft and doing role plays. So Taylor Swift, who, I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of, but I've gotten to like her a lot more lately, specifically after reading this. I don't know if you know this, but her $1 billion world tour, before she went and did it, every day she ran on a treadmill for 3 hours and sang every song. And if it was a fast song, she sped up the treadmill. If it was a slow song, she slowed it down. She wanted to understand her breath, her stamina, and her ability to be able to deliver the show that where she performs for 3 hours. Right. And understanding the greats of the world, right? Are doing that type of work. And then I look at in the sports arena, I follow a lot of people in terms of what did they do when they reach the apex, right? So understanding, how a Tom Brady continued to work on the fundamentals, fundamentals of how his foot was placed, how he moved left to right, how he did certain things, because the fundamentals, I think it was him or his coach that basically said the difference between, the greats and the immortals are just how much they work on the fundamentals and becoming immortal at those things. The rest comes with it, right? And that's sales to me is 101. Work on the listening, work on the questions.
Beautiful. Love that. Thank you for sharing that, Will. We'll put links to all those in the show notes. Definitely, and not a link to the tickets for the Taylor Swift tour, because that's gone already. So, Will, you've shared some incredible ideas and insights and wisdom with our audience of sales leaders today. Closing thought, final bit of wisdom, something to plug. The floor is yours.
So one thing to plug, if you ever have a sales question, reach out to me. I'll talk to anyone about anything. Like no pitch, promise.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to chat. I love to learn from people, love to hear what their problems are, see what's going on in the world, and I'm happy to share the insights that I have.
Right.
And then for me, this year in 2024, the big thing for me is thinking about life as a bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that if we solve for the 80%, right, that
Mm-hmm.
like we'll be doing really, really well. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with the teams that I'm working with today is thinking about that 80%,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then thinking about like, hey, like just really, really honing in on how to make ourselves excellent there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Make ourselves excellent there first before we worry about the outliers.
Yeah.
And so that again is the fundamentals. So for
Yeah.
me, it's like all fundamentals, just get great at those fundamentals. You will stand out. I
Yeah.
can't tell salespeople and sales leader how many times someone hasn't commented on,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, like you did these things that are just fundamentals so great. And people
Mm-hmm.
notice those things. So just really work on those things. That's my final thought.
Love it. Will, I've had a blast visiting with you today. I really look forward to carrying on this conversation offline. Thank you for being a guest on Full Funnel Freedom.
Thank you. I can't believe it was 30 minutes, man. That was fantastic. I had so much fun.
Sales leaders, clearly, I had a blast visiting with Will today. I love his passion for science. I love his passion for process. Few things that really stood out to me. So, number one, if we look at experiments, I'm a big fan of razors. Most of you have heard of Occam's razor, or acid test is usually how I refer to them. And the quick acid test for me as it relates to experiments or even activities is, does it advance my business? So it being the experiment I want to do, the variable I want to adjust, the activity I want to do, does it advance my business? Now, if the answer is not 100% absolutely, make some adjustments. It's not the right thing. It's going to feel good in the moment, and you'll probably get some impressive data, and you'll be able to tell the CEO or the board or the investors that, you ran this great experiment, look at all this great data, and they're going to say, yeah, except that didn't move the needle on any of the metrics that we actually care about. So number one, does it advance my business? Acid test for adjusting variables, running experiments, or doing activities. The other thing that really stood out to me is this idea of sellers who get really successful and they're like, yeah, why do I need to be trained? Why do I need to do any sort of development? It's like, well, why is it that in sales, once we get to a level of success, we decide that, we know everything? And we're just going to go with what we've been doing for years and years. There's no other role that I'm aware of where once we get to a certain level of success, we don't continue developing. And that ties into the other insight from today's episode is around the fundamentals. And I'm sure some of you are going to roll your eyes when I'm talking about, doing the fundamentals and practicing the fundamentals. Will's absolutely correct. The legends, the all-timers, the Tom Brady's, the Michael Jordans, whoever, they work on the fundamentals. When I trained Muay Thai, the top fighters in our gym spent more time working on their jabs than they did on anything else. And if you are, in any sort of way familiar with boxing or Muay Thai or kickboxing, anything like that, the jab is like step one. Like it's the super basics. However, if you look at the really top champions, all of them have a really devastating jab. And so what are our sellers doing to work on the fundamentals, asking the questions, setting the agendas, supporting the client guide themselves as opposed to our sellers pushing them? And what are we as leaders working on in terms of fundamentals? What are we doing to level up our coaching, to level up our questioning? So when we ask a question, we actually get an answer instead of a reaction. Very curious to hear what your takeaways are on our social media. Thanks for listening. Until we connect on the next episode, go create full funnel freedom. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Full Funnel Freedom podcast. You can continue to support us by leaving us a review and a rating, sharing this episode with a couple of sales leaders in your network who you care about. I'd love to connect with you. I'm easy to find, Hamish Knox on LinkedIn. Also, if you'd like a free 15-minute call with me, go to www.hamish.sandler.com/how-to-sandler. Until we connect on the next episode, go create full funnel freedom.